We're going to go, I think the first section will go down through 22. We may get through that, we may not. We'll just see how we do on time today. Mr. Mark, will you lead us in an opening word of prayer, and we'll get into our Bible study this morning.
Father in heaven, we're deeply thankful for this Lord's Day that you provided for us, that we come together at this location, that we pray that we bring our minds and thoughts on thy word, we glean the truths from it, and apply those truths to our lives. We pray for those away from us, for those travel or sickness, we pray that you would be with them, so they may once again return to us. Be with us in this study, Father, in Christ's name.
Amen. Okay. How about Mark, Becky, and then we'll go over to, Mike, Becky, and then over to Mark, and then we'll come up this way. We'll take 2 verses apiece, guys, for those who want to read. Start in verse 12. After you finish reading, then I'll just read a little bit of the verses before, kind of let you know where we're at in our study. But if you'll go ahead, Mike.
And we beseech you, brethren, to know them which labor among you and are over you in the Lord, and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Be at peace among yourselves.
Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that they are unruly, comfort, double-minded, support the weak, be patient toward all men. See that none render evil from evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men.
Rejoice always, pray without ceasing.
In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophecies. Test all things, hold fast what is good. Abstain from every form of evil.
Mark, I think that's the shortest reading you're ever going to get Sunday morning. I mean, good grief. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. 5 words. He had 5 words. Anyways, yeah, just a lot of good admonition here for us, not only for the brethren at Thessalonica. Remember, guys, what we've been discussing last week as we're winding down, talking about the kind of people that we are to be. Remember verse 9, for God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Therefore, comfort each other and edify one another, just as you also are doing. It's very important that we see the need to edify one another. We have a very important role of strengthening each other. We talked about that. And he talks about here the things that we do as a congregation, we need to be doing as a congregation to maintain the unity, the closeness, the strength that we possess as a congregation. He mentions in verse 12, and we urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you. Okay, who is he talking about in verse 12?
The elders.
Okay, good. Yeah. What was that, Mark?
Could be elders, could be the preacher, minister, men in the congregation.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, in other passages of Scripture, you even have Paul wanting the brethren to encourage others that labor among them. Not necessarily, you have brethren that are laboring here. So, if we don't have elders or deacons here, does that mean nobody's doing anything? Is anybody working here?
They are.
Yeah, we got a lot of people working here, right? We got a lot of ladies working. We got a lot of men working here. But they're teaching class, helping others, supporting the weak that we're going to talk about later, the faint-hearted. There's a lot. He's talking about support them. So my question is, and even if we are talking about elders, when he talks about recognize those who are among you. So when you talk about this idea of recognize, it's just like, okay, I know you did it. I know who you are. Is that what he means? Just recognize? I might recognize you. Well, I guess that's good enough now.
Mine says to respect those, and so respect usually is a little bit more than just, hey,
It is.
I see what you did there.
Exactly.
You know, it's, you know, showing appreciation and, you know, and like if someone takes the time to clean something, you don't just automatically trash it. That's not showing respect. That's
No.
like,
And again, the verse by verse kind of cuts it off, right? Because you're talking about, look at the next verse. He says, and to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake, be at peace among yourselves. You know, when we're talking about this idea of, when he says here, I like the phrase, esteem them very highly in love. There are ways that we show that respect. There are ways that we recognize. And what are some ways? Well, obviously, as you just mentioned there, is that we not only show them respect and we express our appreciation for them, but I think it's also recognizing what we don't do. And what don't we do? And I think that's brought up in this verse. What don't we do? What would be that which we should not do? Nancy?
Like just put them just above everything.
Well, that's, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking about going the other extreme, right? Bad-mouthing them, sowing discord, creating factions within the congregation, the lack of love and understanding that needs to be there within a congregation. Because he mentions here in this verse that be at peace among yourselves. I mean, is the Bible, I'll get into that question in a moment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it, and maybe I'm taking this wrong, I think we need to work together in doing things. And where a lot of people just, and I don't know, it's even the fact that we sow discord is maybe we just sit back and do nothing.
Okay.
And let everybody else do everything. And, you know, and maybe hard feelings,
That's true.
you know.
And I think,
I don't know.
and I think that can play. I think there can be this attitude or disposition of just taking for granted.
Right, get done.
Yeah, that somebody will do it, and I'm not going to do it. But even with that idea, remember he was talking about in this passage about be at peace among yourselves. Even though he's talking about all people and those who labor among you, those that you esteem highly for what they're doing with love. Does the Bible speak much about peace for Christians? Does a passage come to mind when you think about the word peace? Anything come to mind? David?
The people cry, peace, peace, and there is no peace.
Okay, there, right? And of course, he's wanting us to have the peace. So, can you think of a passage that's more positive?
Peace that passes understanding.
The peace that passes all understanding. I was thinking Romans chapter. What were you thinking, Stacey?
Well, live peaceably among all men.
Romans 12. Yeah, Romans 12. I was just about to read that. Verse 18. As much as lies within us, let's live peaceably with all men. And of course, the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the what?
Peacemakers.
Peacemakers. You know, this, and of course, Jesus, the Prince of Peace.
well, and also one of the fruit of the spirits is peace.
Yeah. As a congregation, what are we going to accomplish here? Lack of peace. Why not? Why wouldn't we accomplish anything if we don't have peace?
Discord all the time.
Discord? Okay.
It's chaos. You can't get anything done. Nobody's
Right.
working together.
Yeah, you've lost focus. You're getting sidetracked. Gene?
Well, in an environment like that, you just don't have the heart to do anything.
Okay.
It's not encouraging.
Well, I think even in our text that we're going to get down to, I don't want to skip over 14 and 15, but when he talks about this idea of rejoicing always, I'm going to tell you, nothing will suck the joy out of you more than talking negatively all the time. You ever been around anybody who just talks negative all the time? Picks you right up, doesn't it? Puts a smile on your face. You're encouraged. It doesn't do that. Now, are there times when things can be discouraging? Of course. I don't think Jesus was hanging on the cross with a smile on his face. When Judas betrayed him, I don't think he was happy about that. There are things that bother us. Matter of fact, that's why he talks about here in don't return evil for evil. somebody does something bad against you, you don't turn around and do something bad against them. There are right ways to handle things, and there are wrong ways to handle things. I think we as a congregation need to understand that when there's something that bothers you, what shouldn't you do?
Let it sit there and fester.
Why not?
It's like a cancer. It starts growing, and when it blows up big, it gets over everybody.
It explodes. You're exactly right, Mark. Being a peacemaker, what are things that you and I can do to be at peace? Is there any way you can promote it? How do you promote that?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness, I like that. How else? How do you promote peace?
Being kind.
Being kind, I like that.
Being patient.
Patient. Anything else that promotes peace? Understanding.
I think the environment of a group of Christians coming together should be to the place where if I have any intentions of saying anything to somebody or doing anything like that, that's not right. But I realize that I cannot do that in this environment because as a Christian, as a group, it should be voiced out. It should be known. In other words, I used to say that, like, I always felt when I was an elder that the elders was under the eldership. In other words, the elders should have that same desire to do what's right as anybody else in the congregation.
Sure, sure. And I think,
You know, if someone knows that they can come and say this and that, it's going to be, you know, nobody's going to bring it out to the light or whatnot, then there's a more intention that that would be done.
mm-hmm. Well, what are we studying on Wednesdays, guys?
Attitude.
Attitudes. Can a bad attitude keep us out of heaven? Well, see, it's bad. It's let's just say the wrong attitude. The wrong attitude can prevent us from doing the right thing. And all we're talking about here is Paul's trying to encourage these brethren that he already praised them for. I mean, we're talking about, you know, brethren that are doing things that are right. Paul just doesn't want them to grow weary. He doesn't want them to stop. He wants them to continue forward. He says in verse 14, we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly. Well, see, he's talking about this idea of making peace and, you know, the kindness you guys were talking about, and the love and esteeming those. But then he comes right back and says, now look, having said that, you need to warn those who are unruly. Who's unruly? Al?
Mine, I have the English Standard. It says the idle. And the idle were, you know, people who are idle, either they're not doing anything, so they're not helping, or they're busy doing, like, the wrong thing because they're just trying to stay busy. And so I think when you see people who just haven't stepped up, who have, you know, who should have that maturity too,
Right.
That's why Paul, you know, wrote to them later, you know, about talking about that they should be teachers and stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you're just sitting back and you're idle, so you may not be creating this big ruckus, but you're not helping the growth either.
That's it.
And so, you know, sometimes when you think of unruly, you think of like a toddler running around.
Right.
But sometimes it's just someone sitting back on their hands saying, well, I'm not causing problems, but you're not helping either.
Well, and they use this in the workforce, right? You're either the problem or the solution. I couldn't think of the word. Thank you. Yeah. I see. I let them. I could have let on. I knew that, but I'm going to fool you guys. Okay. So you're the problem or you're the solution, and we are the type of people as God's people. We're always looking for a solution. You see a problem? Okay. Guess what? It needs to be fixed. No, I'm just going to talk about the problem. No. You know what? We're in the business of seeking solutions. And the Lord has given us direction in those areas of how to handle that. And I think these are some of the key things here. So when he says warn them, was he addressing the unruly here? No, he wasn't talking to them. He's talking about you guys take care of this. You speak up. You do something about this. And as Mark was mentioning, you don't keep it inside, because you keep it inside, it's going to burst, okay? When it gets to that point, it's going to be pretty hard to reason. And that's why the wisdom of the Lord is so important for us to abide by. And so warn them. And again, when do you do this? Oh, don't lose that thought. No, don't lose my question. Go ahead, Nicole.
I think that in some ways, Paul's like further explaining what it means to live in peace with one another by this verse. Because I mean, if someone's unruly among you, your group is not at peace.
Right.
And so in order to establish this peace, you have to admonish the ruly.
That's it. That's it. That's why, it isn't like, that's why my next question was, well, when do you deal with this? You see, we can be at peace, and if an issue rises, oh no, we're not at peace. Well, wait a second here. We got a situation, let's deal with it, and then we are. Okay, and that's why, when do we warn? When do we warn, by the way? ASAP, right? I mean, as soon as possible. We want to nip it. Why want to nip it? Now we're back to Mark's point again. You nip it so it doesn't fester, because I'm going to tell you, when something festers and you can't fix it, it's going to be a while before peace is actually achieved. And so we again see how we are supposed to conduct ourselves. Nancy?
Well, sometimes the small problem becomes bigger because it gets blown out of proportion.
It really does. It's kind of my sermon this morning, talking about that. But you'd be amazed of how a little thing can become a big thing. But it usually isn't this little thing that's become a big thing. It's because this thing didn't get dealt with, because this didn't get dealt with, then you got something else comes up, but that's made this magnify even more. Another issue comes, well, that magnifies this even more. Because 9 times out of 10, I'm going to actually say 99 times out of 100, is that whenever I get together and talk about this issue, it isn't very long before this issue was brought up. Well, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about this. Well, because this wasn't dealt with, and so then all these other things become problems. That's why we need to nip it. Jane?
Well, as we obey the gospel and follow what Jesus teaches, hopefully we do this at a younger age, then that will go over into the home, into the community, at work. In other words, if you're a person that's thinking that way, then it's not only going to be done in the church, but it's going to be done in your life.
Right. I like the peacemaker. I was visiting with Kevin in prison this week, and he was talking about him and another fellow were having a Bible study, and another guy was put in with their group, and he came in and he started cussing. I didn't know this was going to be a Bible study, and he used all of these expletives, and the guy was just being mean to them. And then it got to the point where neither of these guys wanted to spend time with him in rec time, and that was making him even more angry. Then nobody wanted to spend time with him. And so one evening, this guy is complaining that he doesn't have any food. You can get commissary, you can have some food in your cell. And he didn't have any food. And so Kevin calls the guard over and says, "Here, give him some of mine." And yet his buddy says to him, "Why did you do that?" He's like, "I think Jesus would have wanted me to do that." But I'm going to tell you what, he did that. He says, "You know this guy? He's been a lot nicer to me." There are times when you have to say to yourself, why? I'll be peacemaker if you make it easy for me. I'll be kind to you if, and we put conditions upon that. We as a church, we take the high road, and we're going to do the best that we can to solve situations that come up. Now and I think this is so important, and Nicole was right, because look what he leads into. Not only does he says, warn those who are unruly, he says, comfort the faint-hearted. Do you know who the faint-hearted are? You know who they are?
Those who weaken faith.
Well, that's actually the next one that we're going to get into. When he talks about the weak, okay? The faint-hearted are more of those that are, and I guess there's a fine line between the two of them because they all relate to the weakness of faith. But in this case, It's more along the lines of very easily discouraged. Do you know anybody that's really easily discouraged? It doesn't take much. You know, somebody who's much stronger, you look at like an eldership, you know, and there's this little problem that comes up. You don't so often see an elder go, that's it, I'm done, I don't want to be an elder anymore, I'm just tired of all these. Well, you don't see that. It's like, well, okay, well, just take care of this and we'll move on. But there are other times when brethren are thrown into a tizzy over some little thing. And he says, brethren, you need to help them. You need to be there to encourage them. Let them know that it's really not, it's not as bad as you might think it is. But remember, when anybody has a problem, if they think it's a serious problem, is it really a serious problem? It is to them. Always remember that. It is to them. To you, you might say, this isn't, well, it is to them. And so there's where I think you get this idea when he's talking about that you need to comfort the faint-hearted, help them through this. And better days are ahead, and help them any way that you can, especially when we're talking about, well, here's what the Bible teaches, and here's what's expected, and here's what you can do to get through this. But we need to be supportive. We don't want to write them off. You know, you either get on or get off. Well, we're not all at that same level. We know we're not all at that same level. There has to be room for growth in our lives, that spiritual maturity. And so we need to be patient, as you guys have brought up a little bit earlier. And of course, he goes on from there to talk about, and uphold the weak and be patient with all. Uphold the weak. Now, getting back to what Nicole said, if you have a weak brother or sister who's sinning, is that what he's talking about here? No, I mean, we're talking about helping, nurturing, bring them along. Would you apply this passage to Simon the sorcerer?
Yep.
I mean, Simon's a new convert, right? And what happens when Peter rebukes him, tells him what he needs to hear? You need to tell them what they need to hear. That's called tough love, by the way. But you do it because you care. But helping everybody. And I think as a congregation, if we constantly see that if I look at you as in all trying to meet my needs, if I just view you guys, just as an example, if I view you guys, you should be supplying my needs. Does that help you? Shouldn't I want to supply your needs? You know, if I'm only going to be a taker and not a giver, it's going to be hard for me. Okay? It's going to be hard for me to grow as a Christian. And Paul is talking about all the brethren here need to be doing this. Gene, you had your hand up.
We can see it in every day that if you have a child that grows up into a family that's weak, as we see today in this world,
okay,
then it's hard. So if you have a Christian that someone obeys the gospel and they are in a group of Christians like that home, then it's rough.
Well, I just think that we all need to understand as brothers and sisters that we all have a role in helping each other. And that's 1 Corinthians chapter 12, but that's also 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. We urge you, brethren, in verse 12. Every one of us here needs to see the role that we can play. Uphold the weak and be patient with all, because the fact is, see that no one renders evil for evil to anyone. See to it. Two wrongs don't make a right, ever. That never works. If somebody's done something wrong, handle it the right way. Don't render evil for evil. I'm thinking of Jesus hanging on the cross. When he was reviled, did not revile in return. You know, we use this expression, take the high road. We have the world that wants us to stoop to their level. Nicole?
I think it's important to kind of realize, though, in verse 14 that we're not supposed to do the same thing for each situation. It doesn't say admonish the weak. It says help the weak.
because they're not in sin.
Right, different situations call for different reactions, and I feel like sometimes we want to, like, if someone is weak or maybe they're doubting or they're discouraged, we want to almost admonish them into being encouraged and to being stronger. And that's not what it calls us to do. We're to encourage the faint-hearted.
Well, how can you do that? That's the question. If we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts, which we like to do in this class, how do you do that?
Well, it's praying with them, it's studying with them, it's weeping when they're weeping and rejoicing when they're rejoicing. And, you know, being there every day to just be like, how, you know, help them see God and help them work through those doubts and help them, you know.
And especially through you, right? They should see, you know, that Christ-like quality in you, your love for the Lord. You know, you're wanting to be an example. Paul talked about that often, how that we are to be examples in this world. And so no more so than when you're talking with a weak person, is that they see how you're handling life anyway. You were going right through that list of Romans chapter 12 of how that we can help one another. We're not talking about somebody that's in sin. We're talking about how does somebody get stronger. Okay, how does it kind of relates to the sermon I preached 3 weeks ago. How do you help somebody to get stronger? Yes, I can go bowling with you. Yes, I can go fishing with you, and that's wonderful. But where does faith come from? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. That's what helps you with that. Now, what can help you as far as getting support from one another? Yeah, go fishing, go hunting, have fun together. You can do those kind of things. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's good to do that. That's why we were admonished to be hospitable to one another. We need to spend time with each other. That's a good thing. Okay? But when it comes right down to it, what's going to help your faith, what is truth. And so praying together, studying together, as you talked about there, pointing out things, you know, you shouldn't do this, and here's how you should do certain things. It's all based upon this, folks. It really is. It's all based upon this. Mal?
Well, I think also what, you know, going off of what Nicole says, if someone comes to you and they say, you know, I've been just really discouraged, like this hasn't been happening, you know, and I keep, you know, someone's like, I don't know what else I can do because I keep trying to put myself out there, and, you know, they're just feeling really alone. It's a time to look at yourself and say, have I made that person feel alone? Have I contributed to that feeling? As opposed to saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way because this, and this. Be like, that's a time to, like, you know, listen and say, you know what, am I actually part of the problem? And I didn't know I was. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, I'm doing all this stuff, everyone should feel encouraged. But then when you hear someone's not encouraged, well, have I talked to them lately? Have I had them over lately? Have I prayed with them? Have I checked in on them? Because I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our own world that then we are blindsided when someone's like, you know, weak because we haven't taken that time. So the whole helping each other is when they come to you, instead of telling them they shouldn't feel that way, it's looking at ourselves. Have I contributed to you feeling this way?
Sure, sure. No, there's no question about that. I mean, when I think about the responsibilities that we have as Christians, it's one thing that we often read within the Word of God. You know, if you're going to quote, you know, weep with those that weep and rejoice with those that rejoice, there's going to have to be communication. There's going to have to be communication. Remember that little festering problem over here? Right, if you don't see it early on, if it's not talked about early on, can you read my mind right now? Can I read your mind? I have no idea, right? I mean, husbands and wives have more problems because of lack of communication. You've got to talk. And here, how does a person know, right? How does a person know about all these things? They're being perceptive, and they need to be in the know about these things, and people need to speak up. Mark and Jean? Mark?
Two things. One, to piggyback on what you say, we have to have that openness. Right? We communicate. We don't have the openness and come in and have that feeling, well, if I tell somebody, then it's going to branch out, whatever. Second one is, we've got to remember, this is among us, among you. So it's a local congregation. We don't have to look at other congregations and their problems, so we have to keep them among ourselves.
Yeah, I like that. Jim?
We have to be careful and let the Word of God speak instead of our emotions. In other words, or our opinions and whatnot, because they may not get the good direction. So, if someone's doing something wrong, you go and say, if you continue to do that, this or that. But if you take the Word of God and say, Joe, I'd like you to read this chapter or whatnot, and let's talk about that. And let the Word speak, and we keep our mouth shut, we do a whole lot better.
I think it goes back to attitude again. The way I'm thinking about it is that I was wondering why there is so much communication breakdown. And I think that in part, there are a lot of reasons why communication breaks down, but in part, a lot of times the person who has the issue and they're letting it fester is being selfish and keeping it silent rather than putting it out there. And I think it's an attitude of, I can handle my own problems, or I'll deal with it, or I'm going to be strong and it's not going to get to me, even though it is getting to me. And so I think the attitude has to shift to, something's bothering me and I need to get it out to everyone and share it. And it's not a self-reliance issue, or it's not a weakness to do it, but it's actually more of a strength to say, hey, I'm having trouble with this, and this is where I'm at, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was joking with Debbie yesterday. I was talking about, I want to do a Dr. Phil versus the great physician, And the things that we're talking about right now, this is what the Lord said, confess your faults one to another. Right? Dr. Phil would say, you need to have that communication. This is nothing new under the sun, and the Bible gives us these fundamentals. And we as brothers and sisters, we spend time with one another. We talk about these things that we're talking about right now. And we should. What this is admonishing us to do is to be aware of what I can do. Look what he says. We just read it in verse 14 and 15. Always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. I want to help others. Can anybody here say, if they come up and say they've got some troubles, you'd say, get in line? Anybody here life perfect? Does anybody here ever not feel, I'm just going to ask you, okay? Maybe I shouldn't ask you to raise your hands. Anybody here ever feel alone? Anybody feel alone?
Do you want us to raise our hands?
Yeah, I'm going to raise my hand, okay? I'm going to raise my. You ever feel alone? You ever feel lonely? Okay, Yeah, you might say, I don't want to do that. I might get back to what James is talking about. If I do something like that, what am I admitting? Weakness. I'm embarrassed. I don't want anybody to know this. You might look at me a little differently. I think so many times we talk ourselves out of doing what God really wants us to do. We try to rationalize and we overthink situations. Man, I try not to be overthinker, maybe because I'm not that smart. Just keep it simple. Seriously, that's why I always tell people, I just tell it like it is, because I don't want to overanalyze. I'm not saying this because I've got an ulterior motive. I'm just saying it. People just like, I think you're doing this because of this. I said, man, you've analyzed me more than I even know what I'm doing. It's just that we think too much, and it can get us into trouble when we just simply have the admonition here. Look, just do good for yourselves, for others, be mindful of others, help others, see that you can grow. And within the process of all this, he says in verse 16, he says, Chuck, just rejoice always. Okay, getting back to something we raised earlier. How do you rejoice always when there are problems in your life? How do you rejoice?
You focus on things that are rejoice-worthy.
Like what? We sing a song. What? Count your blessings. What are some? Heaven. I was just going to ask for a list. Okay. When things are going tough, could you say they could be worse? doesn't make the situation any better, right? I mean, it doesn't make it go away, so to speak. But if I'm going to rejoice on the things that we can lose focus of, and I appreciate that, James. I can lose focus of heaven. I can lose focus of my relationship with the Lord, my sins are gone. I have a hope of, again, back to the hope of heaven, but I have all those spiritual blessings in Jesus Christ. I have a church family. You know, there may be times when I might feel like I'm not loved, but I know my church family loves me. How I feel isn't necessarily true of what's real. You know what I'm saying? I may feel lonely, but that doesn't mean I am alone. I may feel a certain way, okay? I may get into my pity party over there. Nobody reads the bulletin. Is that true? Please tell me no. Please tell me. Okay. Nobody reads the bulletin. You know, yeah, you can get into your pity party, but you can rejoice, but, you know, focus on the good. You guys were talking about that earlier. It's so easy, and that's why when a problem festers, it's so easy that that's all you see. You don't see any good or any good that has been done. Back to what Mallory was talking about. And that's the sad part. When you have a problem, you forget to see the things that you should have been rejoicing about. Look at all this that has been done for you. I don't see that. Well, that's what happens. You lose focus. Mark?
Also, we rejoice in 1 Corinthians 10:13 that God allowed us to go through that because He gives us an escape. Just the thought that He's allowing us to experience that.
Yeah. James 1, right? Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. James?
I was just going to say that maybe you have to be careful of what you desire. You know, for example, like with your bulletin example, you may desire a lot of people to read it, whereas you could just focus on the fact that you put together a really good bulletin. And that's the part that you needed to do, is to convey a message.
Good point.
Good point. So a lot of times when people get frustrated and have issues, it's because they focused on a personal desire that maybe they shouldn't have focused on.
You kind of reminded me of the other day. What was it? Remember you were saying something?
Yeah.
I think you remember.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, what was that?
We were at the
fair,
and you were having issues with the kids coming up and playing with the...
Kids were coming up and pushing those buttons, who've done it 27 times already. It's the same questions, boys, same questions. And James came back with an interesting comment. What did you tell me, James?
I basically just said that you were upset because you desire something else. You're desiring to get a bunch of adults to come and sign up and so on and so forth, and that's your goal and focus. And so it was bothering you that the kids were a possible impediment to that.
See, he was talking about the attitude that I had was coming as a direct result of my expectations, okay? It's kind of like if I'm upset at a red light, you know, like you talked about, you can apply that right across the board. Why, Chuck, you could have been in the car saying, Chuck, there's a reason why this light bothers you. Why? Because you had expectations of wanting to be somewhere. It's always about what you're expecting, right? How it affects you. And getting back to what Mark was somebody was just making the comment, that sometimes your expectations can be wrong. Okay, they can be bad. And because of those expectations, you know, I want comments every week from the bulletin. I want everybody, your expectations, you're going to set yourself up for a fall. And it's like teaching new converts, telling the new converts, guess what? You become a Christian, you'll never have any problems. You become a Christian, no brother will ever treat you badly. You're setting somebody up for a fall because life is not perfect. And so you need to be careful of what you do expect. And I do understand that life is going to have its difficulties, but Chuck, he came right out and said, rejoice. Rejoice. And there's something seriously wrong when we as Christians cannot be happy as Christians. There's something seriously wrong. And, he said, well, I just feel that way. I just don't feel that. Well, okay, there comes a point where the onus is on me. That's what I'm reading. The onus is on me. I can't put that onus on you. You make Chuck rejoice. You make Chuck happy. You make Chuck content. No, Chuck, you rejoice. Janet?
And we may have already discussed this a little bit, but going back to the person that's lonely, they need to look at themselves also. What are they doing to, are they talking to people? Are they inviting people over, or are they, eating? I mean, just conversing. I mean, what are they doing to help that out? I mean, it's not, them just standing there or sitting there and expecting people to come, because, it's a two-way street. Everything's a two-way street.
Well, it's all about communication.
Right. That's
all.
exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's on everything.
It is. It's right across the board, and we can all relate to this, even within family, whether it's a problem at work. James?
I was just going to say, we don't realize it, but we have tremendous power in choosing. And if we just choose what we're going to focus on, or choose how we're going to perceive different things, and so on and so forth, I mean, we can really influence ourselves. And we've got a guide book to help us with that. But it's just, the problem is that we forget that we can choose to focus this way, or perceive that way, or, go forward. So.
Well, and I think of Jesus himself, when many stopped following him. If anybody could have, and then being wrongfully accused, if anybody could have felt sorry for himself, it would have been him. Nancy?
And sometimes we also look for that approval from others instead of just accepting and going on with the life, to just keep doing what we know is right, and not expecting somebody to pat you on the back all the time. Not doing it for the wrong reasons, do it for the right reasons.
It's true. It's true. I just got to realize that, when I talked about my own pity parties, I got to realize that when I stand in judgment, I cannot stand there before the Lord and say, well, let me just tell you what they didn't do. They didn't read my book. You know how many hours I put into that? Just whine and whine. And sermons I put together, blah, 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 blah. Just go on and on and on. They say confession is good for the soul. I don't do this all the time at home. But my point is, we all have our own little things that we deal with. James talked, we got a guidebook here. We're studying this stuff every week and Wednesdays. And you've got personal studies that are going on, your own reading, your own prayer life. I understand that. But the reason we do all this stuff is because it deals with the very things that we face day in and day out. And if we don't think these kind of Bible studies don't help us, we've missed the boat. I feel sorry for people who think that, I'll skip Bible study, I'll just come to worship. Folks, this is getting into the nuts and bolts. This is what helps us grow. This helps us to get through the struggles that we face every day at work and family and within the church. And we need to see the value of all that. Appreciate your thoughts today, guys. Powerful stuff. Helps me. Hopefully helps us all. Appreciate it.
How are you?
Yeah. I don't know where that came from. Seriously? Oh, we got that.
It's underneath.
I've been away for a week, so it's
a good break, huh? Yeah. Now you gotta catch up.